The whispers started the moment Olivia Crawford stepped into the general store, her long sleeves conspicuous in the sweltering heat of Mojave, California, and the way she flinched when old Mrs. Henderson brushed past her told everyone watching exactly what they needed to know. It was August 1876, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of this small railroad town, turning the air thick and shimmering. Olivia kept her eyes downcast as she gathered supplies, her movements careful and measured, like someone who had learned through painful experience not to draw attention. She was perhaps 22, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a severe bun and pale blue eyes that might have been pretty if they did not hold such wariness. Her dress, despite the oppressive heat, covered her from neck to wrist to ankle, the fabric faded but clean. "Poor thing," Martha Simmons murmured to her companion near the flour barrels. "Did you see how she moved just then? Like a whipped dog?" "Hush now," the other woman replied, though her voice carried no less pity. "It is not our business what happens between a man and his wife." But it was the talk of the town nonetheless. Olivia had arrived 6 months ago with her husband, Vernon Crawford, a rail supervisor who had taken a position overseeing the maintenance crews along this stretch of track. Vernon was a slight man with thinning hair and cold gray eyes, the kind who compensated for his lack of physical presence with a sharp tongue and quick temper. The railroad men respected his efficiency but found little else to admire. They noticed how Olivia never came to town socials, how she appeared only when necessary to purchase supplies, always with those telltale long sleeves and high collars, always with that haunted look in her eyes. What they did not know was that 300 miles away, in the high country of the Sierra Nevada, a man named Quinlan Barrett was preparing to descend from his mountain sanctuary for the first time in 8 months. Quinlan was 30 years old and built like the granite peaks he called home. Standing well over 6 feet, his frame carried hard muscle earned through years of trapping, hunting, and surviving in unforgiving wilderness. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, sun-streaked and often tied back with a leather cord, framing a face weathered by wind and sun but still handsome in a rugged, untamed way. His eyes were a startling gray-green, the color of storm clouds over pine forests, and his hands were calloused and strong enough to break a man's arm, or gentle enough to set a broken bird's wing. He had been a mountain man for nearly a decade, preferring the company of eagles and elk to the complexity of human civilization. But even a mountain man needed supplies eventually, and his cache of salt, gunpowder, and other essentials had run low. So he packed his mule, secured his cabin, and began the long journey down to the flatlands, planning to reach Mojave where he could resupply before winter arrived. The descent took him 5 days of hard travel. He watched the landscape change from towering pines to scrub oak to desert sage, felt the air grow hotter and drier with each mile. By the time he rode into Mojave on a scorching afternoon, even his mule looked disgusted with the heat. The town was larger than he remembered from his last visit 2 years prior. New buildings lined the main street, and the railroad depot bustled with activity. Quinlan felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came when surrounded by too many people, too much noise. He wanted nothing more than to conduct his business and return to the peaceful solitude of his mountains. He hitched his mule outside the general store and stepped inside, grateful for the relative coolness. The store was well stocked, serving both the townspeople and the railroad crews that passed through regularly. Quinlan began gathering what he needed, working from the mental list he had prepared during his journey. That was when he saw her. Olivia stood near the fabric counter, counting out coins with trembling fingers. Even in the dim interior of the store, Quinlan could see the purple shadow along her jaw, barely concealed by powder. His jaw tightened. He had seen that look before, years ago, on another woman in another place, a woman he had been too young and powerless to help. As if sensing his gaze, Olivia looked up. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that brief connection, Quinlan saw such depths of pain and resignation that something fierce awakened in his chest. She looked away quickly, gathering her parcels with shaking hands. "That will be $2.40, Mrs. Crawford," the shopkeeper said, his voice careful and neutral. She counted out the exact amount, not a penny more, and hurried toward the door. In her haste, she stumbled slightly on the threshold, and her parcels tumbled to the floor. Quinlan was there in 3 long strides, bending to help gather the scattered items. "Let me help you, madam," he said, keeping his voice low and gentle. "No, please, I can manage," she said quickly, but he was already collecting the spilled sugar and coffee. That was when he saw it. As she reached for a fallen sack, her sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal finger-shaped bruises, dark purple against her pale skin, circling her wrist like a shackle. More bruises disappeared up her forearm, and Quinlan felt rage, pure and cold, flood through his veins. She saw him notice, saw his eyes darken and his jaw clench. Fear flashed across her face, and she yanked her sleeve down, snatching the last of her parcels from his hands. "Thank you," she whispered, and fled. Quinlan remained crouched on the floor, hands still extended, watching her disappear into the blazing sunlight. Something had shifted in that moment, something fundamental and irrevocable. He had spent a decade avoiding human entanglements, finding peace in isolation, but this woman with her frightened eyes and hidden bruises had reached into his chest and grabbed hold of something he thought he had buried long ago. "You will want to stay clear of that situation, friend," the shopkeeper said quietly. "Vernon Crawford is not a man to cross, and he guards what is his with a jealous eye." "What he does to her," Quinlan said, his voice rough with barely controlled anger, "that is not guarding. That is breaking." "Maybe so," the shopkeeper replied, shaking his head sadly. "But there is nothing to be done. She is his wife, legal and binding. The law does not interfere between a man and his wife." Quinlan rose to his full height, his expression hard as granite. "Perhaps the law does not, but I am not the law." He completed his purchases in silence, his mind working through possibilities and consequences. He should leave. He should pack his supplies, return to his mountains, and forget the haunted woman with bruises like fingerprints on her skin. He had learned long ago that caring led to pain, that involvement meant complications he could not afford. But even as he told himself these things, he knew he would not leave. Could not leave. Not until he understood the full extent of the situation and determined what, if anything, he could do to help. Quinlan rented a room at the boarding house, a luxury he rarely indulged in, but necessary if he planned to stay in town for more than a day. The landlady, a pleasant widow named Mrs. Chen, provided him with a clean room and information freely given over supper that evening. "The Crawfords live in the railroad supervisor's house just north of the depot," she told him as she served stew and fresh bread. "Been here about 6 months. He is efficient at his work, they say, but hard on his men. Harder still on his wife, though most folks pretend not to notice." "Why does she not leave?" Quinlan asked, though he already knew the answer. He had seen this story play out before, knew the chains that bound women in situations like this. Mrs. Chen sighed heavily. "Where would she go? She has no family that anyone knows of, no money of her own. A woman alone in this world, especially one without resources, faces prospects worse than a bad marriage. At least that is what she likely tells herself each night." "Someone should intervene," Quinlan said quietly. "Many have thought the same. The preacher spoke to Vernon once, suggested he might treat his wife with more Christian charity." Vernon smiled and assured him everything was fine, and Olivia backed his words, though anyone with eyes could see the fresh bruise on her cheek. What can anyone do when the victim herself will not speak against her tormentor? That night, Quinlan lay awake in his rented bed, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with his conscience. He thought of Olivia's eyes, the way they had met his with such brief, desperate connection, before fear shuttered them closed again. He thought of the bruises, and wondered what other injuries lay hidden beneath those concealing clothes. He thought of his mother, dead these 20 years, who had also worn long sleeves in summer and walked carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter her fragile existence. His father had been a drunk and a brute, and young Quinlan had been powerless to stop the beatings. He had been only 10 when his mother died, officially of pneumonia but truly of despair and accumulated injuries. He had run away the next year, unable to bear living under the same roof as the man who had destroyed her. The mountains had become his refuge, his sanctuary from the cruelties people inflicted on each other. But he was not powerless now. He was a grown man, strong and capable, and perhaps fate had brought him down from his mountains for exactly this purpose. The next morning, Quinlan positioned himself on the boardwalk across from the general store, whittling a piece of wood and watching the comings and goings of the town. He told himself he was merely observing, gathering information, but he knew he was waiting for another glimpse of her. She appeared near midday, moving quickly through the heat with a basket over her arm. Even from a distance, Quinlan could see how she held herself carefully, how she avoided making eye contact with anyone. She entered the store and emerged 10 minutes later with her purchases, heading back toward the railroad supervisor's house. Quinlan followed at a discreet distance, wanting to see where she lived, to understand the layout of her prison. The house was modest, but well maintained, painted white with green shutters, sitting slightly apart from the other buildings. A small garden struggled in the desert heat beside it, and Quinlan could see evidence of recent tending in the watered soil. He was about to turn back when the front door opened and a man emerged. Vernon Crawford was exactly as Quinlan had imagined: average height, slender build, dressed in a suit too formal for the desert heat. His face was narrow and pinched, his movements quick and irritable. He called something back through the open door, his voice sharp with displeasure, and Quinlan heard Olivia's quiet response, though he could not make out the words. Vernon strode off toward the depot, and Quinlan felt his hands clench into fists. Everything about the man radiated petty cruelty and small-minded authority, the kind of man who needed to make others smaller to feel large himself. Quinlan returned to the boarding house, his mind churning with plans half-formed and dangerous. He could not simply confront Vernon, challenge him to leave his wife in peace. Such direct action would only make things worse for Olivia, might even get her killed if Vernon's rage turned murderous. No, this required a more careful approach, one that would ensure Olivia's safety while removing her from her husband's control. But how? She had already made clear, through her silence and denials, that she would not openly accuse Vernon or seek help. She was trapped as surely as if she wore iron chains, and Quinlan needed to find a way to break those chains without destroying her in the process. That evening, Quinlan found himself at the town's small saloon, nursing a whiskey and listening to the railroad men talk. They spoke of work schedules and supply shipments, of the heat and the miserable conditions, and eventually, inevitably, of their supervisor. "Crawford is a hard man," one worker said, shaking his head. "Docked me half a day's pay because I was 10 minutes late returning from lunch. 10 minutes. He is worse to his wife than to us," another added, lowering his voice. "I was walking past their place last week, heard her crying and him shouting. Then something crashed, like furniture breaking. I wanted to intervene, but what could I do? She is his legal wife." "She deserves better," a third man said quietly. "You can see it in her eyes, how she used to be different. My cousin knew her family back in St. Louis before they all died of cholera. She was engaged to a good man, a banker's son, but he died too. She was left with nothing, and Vernon offered her marriage. She probably thought she had no choice." Quinlan absorbed this information, piecing together Olivia's history. An orphan with no resources, presented with marriage as her only viable option, now trapped with a man who used her as a target for his anger and inadequacy. The injustice of it burned in Quinlan's chest like a coal. He left the saloon and walked through the cooling desert night, trying to formulate a plan that would not make everything worse. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear air, reminding him of nights in his mountain cabin where the only sounds were wind through pines and the occasional call of an owl. He thought of bringing Olivia to such a place, showing her what peace could feel like, what safety truly meant. But such thoughts were foolish fantasies. He barely knew this woman, and she had given him no indication she wanted or needed his help. For all he knew, she had made her peace with her situation, found some way to survive that worked for her. Who was he to come crashing into her life with his righteous anger and savior complex? Yet he could not shake the image of those bruises, could not forget the pain in her eyes when they had met his in the general store. The next day was Sunday, and Quinlan found himself attending the small church service, something he had not done in years. He told himself he was simply observing local customs, being sociable, but he knew he was hoping to see Olivia. She arrived with Vernon just as the service was beginning, her arm linked through his in a mockery of marital unity. She wore a high-necked dress in pale yellow, with long sleeves despite the heat, and a bonnet that shadowed her face. They sat in a pew near the front, and Quinlan positioned himself several rows back, where he could watch without being obvious. Throughout the service, Vernon kept his hand possessively on Olivia's knee, his fingers occasionally tightening in what looked like warning or threat. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the preacher but seeing nothing. Quinlan wanted to stride forward, rip Vernon's hand away, carry Olivia out of this place and this life. Instead, he sat and listened to the sermon about forgiveness and Christian duty, and wondered how a loving God could allow such suffering to persist. After the service, the congregation gathered outside in the meager shade of a cottonwood tree, making small talk and sharing news. Quinlan hung back, watching as Vernon held court with other railroad officials, his hand still gripping Olivia's arm. She stood silent beside him, a decoration to prove his respectability, her face carefully blank. Then, Vernon was called away by one of his supervisors, some urgent matter requiring his immediate attention. He released Olivia with a whispered instruction that made her flinch, then strode off toward the depot. For just a moment, Olivia stood alone, uncertain, before beginning to walk slowly back toward her house. Quinlan made his decision in an instant. He followed her, keeping a respectful distance until they were away from the other townspeople, then called out softly, "Mrs. Crawford." She turned, startled and frightened, her hand going to her throat. When she saw it was him, the mountain man from the general store, her expression shifted to confusion, mixed with wariness. "I do not mean to frighten you," Quinlan said, approaching slowly with his hands visible and non-threatening. "I wanted to speak with you, just for a moment." "My husband will return soon," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should not be speaking with strange men." "I know. I will be brief." He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to speak quietly, but far enough to ease any fears she might have. "My name is Quinlan Barrett. I'm a trapper from the high country, just passing through town for supplies. What do you want?" Her voice trembled slightly, and her eyes darted past him, watching for Vernon's return. "I want you to know that if you ever need help, if you ever need somewhere safe to go, I will help you. No questions, no conditions, just help." The words tumbled out, more direct than he had intended, but there was no time for careful diplomacy. Her face went pale, then flushed with color. "I do not know what you are talking about. I am perfectly fine. The bruises on your wrist say otherwise, the fear in your eyes says otherwise." Quinlan kept his voice gentle but firm. "I am not asking you to confide in me or to make any decisions right now. I am simply telling you that you have an option, should you ever need one." "You do not understand," she whispered, and now there were tears gathering in her eyes. "You cannot understand. Please just leave me alone. If Vernon sees us talking, he will—" She stopped, but the implication hung heavy in the desert air. "He will hurt you more," Quinlan finished quietly. "I know. I have seen this before, lived through it in my own family. That is why I cannot simply walk away, cannot pretend I do not see what is happening to you." Olivia looked at him fully then, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the sincerity in his storm-colored eyes, the strength in his broad frame, the genuine concern that softened his weathered features. Something in her expression shifted, a crack forming in the careful walls she had built around herself. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you care about a stranger's troubles?" "Because someone should," Quinlan replied. "Because you deserve better than what you are receiving. Because I have the ability to help, and that makes it my responsibility to offer." A door slammed in the distance, and Olivia jumped like a startled deer. "I must go. Please do not approach me again. It will only make things worse." But as she turned to hurry away, she looked back over her shoulder and said so quietly he almost missed it, "Thank you." Then she was gone, practically running back to her prison, and Quinlan was left standing in the dusty street with the sun beating down and a growing certainty that he could not leave this town until Olivia Crawford was safe. He spent the next 3 days establishing a presence in Mojave, making himself a familiar sight rather than a suspicious stranger. He helped the blacksmith repair a wagon, traded game from his pack for fresh vegetables from the local farmers, and generally made himself useful around town. All the while, he gathered information about Vernon Crawford and his routines, about the railroad schedules and the layout of the supervisor's house. He learned that Vernon worked late most evenings, going over accounts and schedules in his office at the depot. He learned that Olivia did her marketing on Tuesday and Friday mornings, always at the same time. He learned that Vernon was disliked by his workers but valued by his superiors for his efficiency. He learned that there had been 2 previous incidents where neighbors heard disturbances from the Crawford house, but when the sheriff investigated at the neighbors' insistence, Olivia had smiled and assured him everything was fine, and Vernon had been coldly polite, and there was nothing the law could do. On the 4th evening, Quinlan was sitting on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset over the desert in spectacular shades of orange and purple, when Mrs. Chen came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You are planning something," she said without preamble, handing him a glass. "I can see it in your eyes, the way you watch that house." Quinlan considered denying it, then decided there was no point. "She needs help." "Yes, she does. But help from you might get her killed. Have you considered that? Vernon Crawford is not the kind of man to let go of what he considers his property, and he will see any interference as theft." Mrs. Chen settled into the chair beside him, her weathered face serious. "I do not tell you this to discourage you, but to make certain you understand the stakes." "I understand them," Quinlan said grimly, "but I cannot simply leave her to suffer. My conscience will not allow it." "Then you must be very careful, and you must be certain that any action you take truly helps her, rather than simply satisfying your own need to intervene." She sipped her lemonade, studying him. "You have a good heart, Quinlan Barrett. I can see that. But good hearts can cause great harm when they act without wisdom." Her words stayed with him through the night, tempering his impulses with necessary caution. She was right, of course. Any action he took must truly benefit Olivia, must give her a genuine chance at freedom and safety, not just transfer her from one man's control to another's. The next morning, everything changed. Quinlan was at the general store, purchasing additional supplies, when Olivia entered. She moved more stiffly than usual, and when she reached for an item on a high shelf, she gasped in pain and pulled her arm back quickly. The shopkeeper pretended not to notice, as did the other customers, all complicit in the town's silent acceptance of her suffering. But Quinlan noticed. He noticed everything. The way she held her left side as if protecting injured ribs, the fresh bruise on her temple partially hidden by her bonnet, the trembling in her hands as she counted out her coins. When she turned to leave, her eyes met his briefly, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. It was not just pain or fear. It was resignation, a kind of death of the spirit that said she had given up hope of anything better. He could not let that stand. Quinlan followed her out of the store, maintaining enough distance to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to intervene if needed. She walked slowly, clearly in pain, heading back toward her house. He wanted to call out, to offer help, but he knew she would refuse, and drawing attention would only endanger her further. Then fate intervened in the form of a runaway horse. The animal came thundering down the street, spooked by something and bolting in blind panic. People scattered, shouting warnings, but Olivia, lost in her own world of pain, did not react quickly enough. The horse was bearing down on her, and she was frozen in its path. Quinlan moved without thinking, his mountain-trained reflexes taking over. He covered the distance in long strides and grabbed Olivia, pulling her against his chest and rolling them both out of the horse's path. They landed hard in the dust, Quinlan taking the brunt of the impact to protect her, and the horse thundered past, missing them by inches. For a moment they lay tangled together, breathing hard. Quinlan became acutely aware of how small she felt in his arms, how fragile despite her stubborn strength. He could feel her trembling, could hear the hitch in her breathing that spoke of pain. "Are you hurt?" he asked, carefully helping her sit up. "I am fine," she said automatically, but when she tried to rise, she cried out and clutched her side. The fall had clearly aggravated her existing injuries. A crowd had gathered, expressing concern and congratulations on the narrow escape. The shopkeeper appeared with water, and Mrs. Chen pushed through to help Olivia to her feet. "She needs to see the doctor," Quinlan said firmly. "That fall may have caused injury." "No," Olivia protested weakly. "I am fine, truly. I just need to go home." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen said briskly. "You will come to the boarding house and rest until we are certain you are unharmed. That was a terrible fright, and you are clearly shaken." Despite Olivia's protests, Mrs. Chen and the other women shepherded her to the boarding house, and Quinlan followed, his jaw set with determination. This was the opportunity he needed, a legitimate reason to speak with her, to offer help in a way that would not raise Vernon's immediate suspicions. At the boarding house, Mrs. Chen settled Olivia in the parlor and sent for the doctor, despite her continued protests. While they waited, she brought tea and insisted Olivia drink it. Quinlan stood near the window, watching the street, knowing that eventually word would reach Vernon about the incident. When the doctor arrived, a kindly older man named Dr. Morrison, he examined Olivia gently but thoroughly. "You have bruised your shoulder in the fall," he announced, "but nothing appears broken. However, Mrs. Crawford, I am more concerned about these older injuries." His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "You have at least 2 cracked ribs that are attempting to heal, and significant bruising to your torso and arms. These injuries did not come from today's incident." Olivia's face went white, then red. "I fell down the stairs last week. I am clumsy." "Yes, you have mentioned falls before." Dr. Morrison closed his bag with a decisive snap. "Mrs. Crawford, I am a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm and to help those in need. If you are in danger, if someone is hurting you, there are people who can help." "I am fine," Olivia whispered, but tears were streaming down her face, betraying her words. "Please, you must not say anything to anyone. Please." The doctor looked at Mrs. Chen, then at Quinlan, his expression helpless and frustrated. They all knew the truth, and they all knew that without Olivia's cooperation, they were powerless to officially intervene. "Very well," Dr. Morrison said heavily. "But I want to see you again in a week to check on those ribs. And Mrs. Crawford, my door is always open, day or night if you need help." After the doctor left, Olivia sat trembling in the parlor chair, her tea untouched, her face buried in her hands. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, offering silent comfort, while Quinlan remained by the window, giving her space but ready to help if needed. "Why does he hate me so much?" Olivia finally whispered, her voice broken. "What did I do to deserve this?" "Nothing," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You did nothing. Some men are simply cruel, and they target those who cannot fight back. I tried to be a good wife. I keep the house clean, have his meals ready, never argue or contradict him. But nothing is ever enough. There is always something wrong, some reason for him to be angry." Olivia raised her head, and her eyes found Quinlan's across the room. "You said you lived through this. How did it end?" Quinlan crossed the room and crouched before her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "My mother died when I was 10 years old. She never fought back, never left, and eventually the injuries and the despair killed her. I do not want that to be your ending, Olivia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something shifted between them at the intimacy of it. She looked at him with those haunted eyes and asked, "What can I do? I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. And even if I did, Vernon would find me. He has connections through the railroad, friends in every town along the line. He has told me as much, told me that if I ever tried to leave, he would hunt me down and make me sorry I was born." "Then we make sure he cannot follow," Quinlan said quietly. "There are places the railroad does not reach, places where a man like Vernon Crawford holds no power. I know these places. I can take you there, keep you safe. You would do this for me? A stranger?" Wonder and disbelief mingled in her voice. "You are not a stranger anymore," Quinlan said simply. "And yes, I would do this. I will do this if you are willing." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine if she could trust this promise. She saw strength there, and sincerity, and something else she was afraid to name. Finally, she nodded, just once, a tiny movement that carried enormous weight. "What do I need to do?" They made their plans carefully over the next hour, speaking in low voices while Mrs. Chen kept watch at the window for Vernon's approach. Quinlan laid out his proposal. In 2 days, on Friday morning when Olivia usually went to market, she would pack only what she could carry in her marketing basket. Quinlan would be waiting with his mule and a spare horse at the northern edge of town, near the old mission ruins. She would walk there as if simply going about her errands, and they would leave immediately, heading into the mountains before Vernon even knew she was gone. "He will come after us," Olivia said fearfully. "He will bring the sheriff, claim I was kidnapped or that I stole from him." Let him try, Quinlan said grimly. The places I am taking you, no posse will follow. The high country is dangerous for those who do not know it, and by the time they could organize a proper search, we will be far beyond their reach. But what then? I cannot live in the wilderness forever. Practical concerns were beginning to surface as the initial shock wore off. No, but you can live there long enough for me to arrange something more permanent. I have friends, fellow trappers, and mountain men who know the territory. We can get you to Sacramento or San Francisco, somewhere far from the railroad and Vernon's influence, with enough money to start over. Quinlan hesitated, then added, or you could stay in the mountains if you wanted. My cabin is remote but comfortable. You would be safe there. Something flickered in Olivia's eyes at that suggestion, something that made Quinlan's heart beat faster, but she only said, let us worry about escape first, then discuss what comes after. A shout from outside made them all freeze. Vernon was striding up the street, his face dark with anger, clearly having heard about the incident with the horse. You need to go, Mrs. Chen said urgently to Olivia. Go out and meet him. Act normally. Do not let him suspect anything. Olivia stood, smoothing her dress and straightening her bonnet, her face transforming into a careful mask of subservience. But before she left, she turned to Quinlan and said, thank you for everything. I will see you Friday. Then she was gone, hurrying out to meet Vernon on the street, and Quinlan watched through the window as she spoke to him, gesturing back toward the boarding house. Vernon's face remained angry, but he seemed to accept her explanation. He gripped her arm, tight enough that even from a distance Quinlan could see her wince, and led her back toward their house. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Chen said quietly, coming to stand beside Quinlan at the window. If Vernon discovers your plan before Friday, he will kill her, and possibly you as well. I know, Quinlan said. That is why we must be very careful over the next 2 days. Those 48 hours were the longest of Quinlan's life. He went about his business in town, careful to appear casual and unconcerned, just a mountain man whiling away time before heading back to his territory. He purchased additional supplies, focusing on items that would support 2 people on a hard journey through rough country. He acquired a second horse, a sturdy mare suitable for riding, telling the stable owner he needed a pack animal for his furs. All the while, he watched the Crawford house from a distance, his gut tight with worry. What if Vernon suspected something? What if he hurt Olivia so badly before Friday that she could not travel? What if she lost her nerve and decided to stay after all? Thursday evening, Quinlan was packing his supplies in his rented room when Mrs. Chen knocked on his door. There was an incident at the Crawford house this afternoon, she said without preamble, her face grave. The neighbor heard shouting and breaking glass. She thought about calling the sheriff but decided against it. She said it was not as bad as some of the other times. Quinlan's hands clenched into fists. How is Olivia? I saw her briefly at her garden this evening. She moved carefully but was on her feet. Whatever happened, it was not severe enough to prevent her from functioning. Mrs. Chen paused. She looked toward the mission ruins while she was outside. I think she was reminding herself that escape is coming. One more night, Quinlan said, more to himself than to Mrs. Chen. She just needs to survive one more night. He barely slept, lying awake listening to the night sounds of the desert and thinking of Olivia in that house with a man who used her as a target for his rage. He thought of his mother, wondered if she had ever had a chance at escape, if anyone had ever offered her the help she needed. He could not change the past, could not save his mother, but perhaps he could save Olivia. Perhaps that would be enough to quiet the guilt that had haunted him for 20 years. Friday morning dawned clear and hot. Quinlan was up before sunrise, finalizing his preparations. He loaded his mule and the mare with carefully balanced packs, ensuring they had enough supplies for a week of hard travel. He checked his weapons, cleaned and loaded his rifle and revolver, hoping he would not need them, but prepared if he did. Then he led the animals quietly out of town, heading for the mission ruins. The old Spanish mission had been abandoned for decades, its adobe walls crumbling back into the desert from which they had risen. It stood about a mile north of town, far enough to be out of sight, but close enough that Olivia could reach it on foot without raising suspicion. Quinlan positioned himself behind a partially collapsed wall where he could watch the approach while remaining hidden. The sun climbed higher, and the desert heat began to build. Quinlan waited, every nerve taut, watching the empty road and trying not to imagine all the ways this plan could go wrong. What if Vernon had decided to accompany Olivia to market this morning? What if she had been too injured to make the walk? What if she had simply changed her mind, decided that the devil she knew was safer than the unknown risk Quinlan represented? Then he saw her. She was walking slowly but steadily up the road, her marketing basket over one arm, her posture careful but determined. She wore a simple brown dress and carried a shawl despite the heat. As she drew closer, Quinlan could see the careful way she held herself, the evidence of recent injuries in every movement. He stepped out from behind the wall as she reached the ruins. "I am here," he said quietly. The relief that flooded her face made his chest ache. "I was afraid you would not come," she whispered, "or that I would not be able to get away. Vernon was suspicious this morning, questioning why I needed to go to market on my usual day when he had not specifically requested anything." "What did you tell him?" "That I was replacing the dish he broke last night when he threw it at my head." Her voice was matter of fact, as if describing the weather rather than violence. He accepted that. Quinlan helped her onto the mare, then swung onto his own horse. Within minutes they were riding north, leaving Mojave and its harsh justice behind. Quinlan set a hard pace, knowing that every mile between them and Vernon was a mile of safety gained. They rode for 3 hours before Quinlan allowed a brief rest near a spring he knew. Olivia dismounted stiffly, and he could see the toll the ride was taking on her injured body. But she did not complain, just drank deeply from the spring and splashed water on her face. "How long before he realizes I'm gone?" she asked. "Probably already has," Quinlan said honestly. "When you did not return from market within the expected time, he would have gone looking. By now he has questioned the shopkeepers, learned you never arrived at the store. He will put together that you have run, and he will be gathering men to come after you." Fear flashed across Olivia's face, but she set her jaw stubbornly. "Then we should not waste time resting." They pushed on through the afternoon, climbing steadily into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The landscape changed around them, desert scrub giving way to scattered pines, the air growing cooler and clearer with each mile. Quinlan navigated by landmarks invisible to anyone else, following trails known only to trappers and mountain men. As the sun began to set, he led them to a sheltered canyon, where a clear stream ran through granite boulders. "We will camp here tonight," he announced. "We have put enough distance between us and any immediate pursuit. The horses need rest, and so do you." While Quinlan tended to the animals and built a small fire, Olivia sat on a rock beside the stream, simply breathing and looking around as if seeing the world for the first time. When he brought her jerky and hardtack for supper, she accepted it gratefully. "I have never been anywhere like this," she said softly, watching the way the fading light painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and rose. "It is beautiful." "It is," Quinlan agreed, though he found himself watching her face rather than the scenery. Away from the town and Vernon's oppressive presence, she seemed different, younger somehow, as if layers of fear and tension were beginning to peel away. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward, Quinlan spread out bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. He saw Olivia's brief flash of uncertainty and said, "You are safe with me, Olivia. I give you my word. I am here to protect you, nothing more." She relaxed visibly. "I know. I would not have come with you if I did not trust you. It is just strange, being alone with a man who does not wish to hurt me. I have forgotten what that feels like." The simple sadness of that statement cut Quinlan to the heart. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain of her past experiences, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he said, "You will remember. In time, when you have been safe long enough, you will remember what it feels like to live without fear." That night, Quinlan woke twice to the sound of Olivia crying out in her sleep, trapped in nightmares. Each time he spoke to her softly from across the fire, not approaching or touching, just letting her know she was safe, and each time she quieted and slipped back into deeper sleep. They were on the trail again by dawn, continuing their climb into the mountains. The terrain grew more rugged, the trails narrower and more treacherous, but Quinlan navigated them with the confidence of long familiarity. Olivia proved to be a capable rider despite her injuries, adapting quickly to the demands of mountain travel. On the third day, as they paused to water the horses at a high meadow, Olivia asked, "Where exactly are we going?" "My cabin is another 2 days north," Quinlan explained. "It is in a valley that few people know exists, accessed only by a narrow pass that is easy to defend. We will be safe there while we decide on your next steps." "Tell me about it," she said. "Your cabin, your life in the mountains. I want to understand the world I am entering." So as they rode, Quinlan told her. He described his cabin, built with his own hands from logs he had cut and shaped. He told her about the valley with its clear lake and abundant game, the way the seasons changed from the golden summers to the snow-locked silence of winter. He spoke of his life as a trapper, the satisfaction of living by his own skill and strength, the peace that came from solitude and self-reliance. Olivia listened with hungry attention, asking questions that showed genuine interest. What did he do when injured or sick, so far from any doctor? How did he preserve food for winter? What about books or music or any of the cultural amenities of civilization? "I have books," Quinlan admitted. 24 volumes that I have collected over the years and read until I have them nearly memorized. Poetry, mostly, and some philosophy. And I have a harmonica that I play badly but enthusiastically on winter nights." She smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed her face. Quinlan found himself wanting to make her smile again, to see that lightness in her expression become permanent. That night, they camped in a grove of towering pines, and the temperature dropped sharply once the sun set. Quinlan gave Olivia his spare blanket and built the fire higher, but he could still see her shivering. Finally, unable to bear watching her suffer from cold, he said, "This is purely practical, you understand, and you can refuse if you wish. But sharing body heat is the most efficient way to stay warm in these temperatures." Olivia considered this, then nodded. "I trust you." Quinlan moved his bedroll next to hers, and they lay down back to back, separated by layers of blanket but close enough to share warmth. He could feel the tension in her body gradually ease as she absorbed his heat, could hear her breathing slow and deepen as she finally relaxed into comfortable sleep. For Quinlan, sleep was slower to come. He was acutely aware of her presence, the small sounds of her breathing, the way she unconsciously moved closer to his warmth during the night. He found himself wanting to protect her from more than just Vernon's pursuit. He wanted to protect her from cold and hunger, from fear and pain, from every harsh thing the world might throw at her. The strength of this desire surprised him. He had spent a decade keeping people at a distance, avoiding emotional entanglements, and now this woman had slipped past all his defenses in a matter of days. The fourth day brought them into truly remote territory, climbing through passes where mountain goats watched their passage with incurious eyes. The air was thin and cold, and Olivia struggled slightly with the altitude, but she pushed on without complaint. Quinlan found himself increasingly impressed by her resilience. She had been beaten down but not broken, hurt but not destroyed, and now that she had a chance at freedom, she was reaching for it with both hands. Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Quinlan pointed to the valley spread below them. "There," he said. "That is home." Olivia caught her breath at the sight. The valley was perhaps 2 miles across, ringed by granite peaks and carpeted with meadow grass. A crystalline lake reflected the sky at its center, and dark pines climbed the lower slopes. Even from this distance, she could see deer grazing near the lakeshore and birds wheeling in the clean air. "It is paradise," she whispered. They descended into the valley as the sun began to set, and Quinlan led her to his cabin on the eastern shore of the lake. It was larger than she had expected, built from massive logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, she found one large room with a sleeping loft, surprisingly well furnished with handmade furniture and numerous personal touches that spoke of years of occupation. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, looking around in wonder. "Over the course of several years," Quinlan confirmed. "I keep adding to it, improving it. There's a root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin and a smokehouse for preserving meat. The valley provides everything I need." That night, after a supper of fresh trout from the lake and wild greens, they sat before the fire and talked, really talked for the first time. Olivia told him about her childhood in St. Louis, the happy years before the cholera outbreak that killed her parents and 3 siblings. She spoke of her first engagement to a kind young man who had also died in the epidemic, leaving her alone and destitute. She described the desperation that had led her to accept Vernon's proposal, the gradual realization that she had traded security for a different kind of death. Quinlan shared his own history, the childhood scarred by his father's brutality, the relief and guilt of running away, the years of wandering before he found his place in these mountains. They discovered shared losses and parallel pain, a foundation of understanding that created unexpected intimacy. "What happens now?" Olivia asked as the fire burned low. "I cannot stay here forever, though part of me wishes I could. Vernon will eventually give up the active search, but he will never truly stop looking. The railroad has records, connections. Someone, someday, might recognize me." "Then we change who you are," Quinlan said. "In a few months, when it is safe to travel again, I will take you to San Francisco. You can establish yourself there with a new name, a new history. I have friends who can help with documentation, who can create a past for you that will hold up to scrutiny." "That would require money," Olivia said quietly. "I have nothing." "I have savings," Quinlan replied. "Furs and gold dust accumulated over years, more than enough to establish you comfortably in a new life." "I cannot take your money. You have already done so much." Olivia's voice was firm despite its softness. "Then consider it a loan, to be repaid when you are able." Quinlan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Olivia, money means nothing to me up here. I cannot eat gold or wear furs I've already sold. Let me use what I have to help you build the life you deserve." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why are you so good to me? What do you gain from all this?" "Peace," Quinlan said simply. "I could not save my mother, could not protect her from my father's cruelty. Perhaps by saving you, I can finally forgive myself for that old failure." Olivia reached across the space between them and took his hand, the first time she had voluntarily touched him. Her fingers were small and delicate in his work-roughened palm, but her grip was strong. "You were a child. You bear no responsibility for what happened to your mother, but I understand the need to make meaning from old pain, and I am grateful, more grateful than I can express, that your need to help intersected with my need to be saved." They sat like that, hands clasped, until the fire died to embers and exhaustion claimed them both. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Quinlan taught Olivia the skills necessary for mountain living, how to fish in the cold lake, how to identify edible plants, how to read weather signs in the sky and the behavior of animals. She proved an eager student, soaking up knowledge with the hunger of someone discovering capabilities she had never known she possessed. In turn, Olivia brought changes to Quinlan's solitary existence. She organized his chaotic collection of supplies, planted a proper herb garden near the cabin, and insisted on regular meals eaten at a table rather than his usual habit of eating whenever hunger struck. She mended his clothes with neat, precise stitches and filled the cabin with small touches of beauty: wildflowers in a clay jug, stones arranged by color on the windowsill, curtains sewn from spare fabric. Her bruises faded as the days passed, the purple and black giving way to yellow and green before disappearing entirely. The careful, frightened way she moved gradually eased into natural grace. The tension that had been carved into her face began to smooth, and Quinlan found himself watching for her smiles, which came more frequently as she began to trust in her safety. 3 weeks into their time in the valley, Quinlan was teaching Olivia to shoot his rifle, a necessary skill if she was to spend time alone in the wilderness. She was a natural, her hands steady and her eyes sharp, and he felt a surge of pride when she hit her target 3 times in succession. "You are a quick study," he said, grinning. "I had a good teacher," she replied, then impulsively threw her arms around his neck in a celebratory embrace. The moment stretched and changed. What had begun as innocent joy transformed into sudden awareness. Quinlan became conscious of how perfectly she fit against his larger frame, how her hair smelled of pine smoke and mountain air, how her eyes, when she pulled back slightly to look at him, had gone wide and wondering. "Quinlan," she whispered, and he could not have said who moved first. But suddenly they were kissing with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinlan stepped back, his expression troubled. "I apologize. That was not appropriate. You are vulnerable, dependent on me for safety. I should not have taken advantage." "You did not take advantage," Olivia said firmly. "I kissed you as much as you kissed me. and I am not so fragile that I cannot know my own heart." She moved closer again, placing her palm against his chest, over his heart. "These weeks with you have been the first time in years I have felt truly alive. You have shown me kindness and respect, treated me as a person of worth rather than a possession. You have given me back myself. Is it so surprising that I have developed feelings for you?" "You have been through trauma," Quinlan said, though his hand had come up to cover hers, holding it against his heart. "Sometimes people confuse gratitude and relief with deeper emotions. I do not want you to mistake your feelings." "I am not a child, and I am not confused," Olivia replied, a touch of heat entering her voice. "I know the difference between gratitude and love. I was engaged before, remember? I know what attraction feels like, what it means to want a future with someone, and I know that what I feel for you is real." Quinlan searched her face, looking for uncertainty or doubt, but found only clear-eyed determination. Still, he needed to be certain. "If we pursue this, if we allow our feelings to develop, it changes everything. You would not be an obligation I am fulfilling, but a partner I am choosing. And I would be choosing you, Olivia, not out of guilt or a savior complex, but because I have come to care for you more than I thought possible." "Then choose me," she said simply, "and let me choose you in return." This time when they kissed, it was slower, deeper, a promise rather than an impulse. Quinlan wrapped his arms around her, careful of her still healing ribs, and marveled at how right this felt, how complete. He had spent 10 years in solitude, convinced he was better off alone, and now he could not imagine his life without this woman in it. That evening, they talked late into the night about what this meant, what they wanted their future to look like. Olivia admitted that the prospect of going to San Francisco alone, starting over in a strange city with a false identity, had filled her with dread. But the idea of staying in the valley, building a life here with Quinlan, felt like coming home. "Are you certain?" Quinlan asked. "Life here is hard, isolated. You would be cut off from society, from culture and convenience. Winters are brutal, and there would be no going back once you make this choice." "I am certain," Olivia said. "I have lived in society, experienced its culture and conveniences, and they did nothing to protect me from cruelty. Here, I have found peace and purpose. Here, I have found you. That is worth more than all the theater performances and dinner parties civilization could offer." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and flourished. They worked side by side to prepare for the coming winter, cutting wood and hunting game and preserving food. Quinlan expanded the cabin, adding a second room that would serve as a proper bedroom, giving them privacy and comfort. Olivia proved remarkably adaptable to mountain life, approaching each challenge with determination and creativity. They talked about making their union official, but that presented complications. Any legal marriage would require documents, and documents created records that Vernon might someday trace. Instead, they created their own ceremony one golden autumn evening, standing beside the lake with the mountains as witnesses, and pledged themselves to each other in words of their own devising. "I promise to honor and cherish you," Quinlan said, holding both her hands in his, "to keep you safe but not imprisoned, to support your strength rather than exploit your vulnerabilities, to be your partner in all things." "I promise to trust and value you," Olivia replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "To build a life with you based on mutual respect and genuine affection, to be your companion in solitude and your comfort in difficulty, to choose you every day for all my days." They sealed their vows with a kiss as the sun set over the peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and both felt the rightness of this moment, the sense that their separate paths had led them exactly where they needed to be. That winter was the happiest of Quinlan's life. The snow fell deep and heavy, sealing them into their valley in pristine isolation, but the cabin remained warm and cozy. They developed routines and rituals. Quinlan would spend mornings checking trap lines and hunting, while Olivia tended to indoor tasks and worked on expanding her skills. Afternoons they would spend together, reading aloud from Quinlan's books or working on various projects to improve their home. Evenings were for talking and lovemaking and simply being together. Olivia bloomed in the mountain environment, growing stronger and more confident with each passing week. The frightened, broken woman Quinlan had first seen in the general store was gone, replaced by someone vibrant and capable. She learned to snowshoe through the deep drifts, to identify animal tracks, to predict weather changes by reading the sky. She became an expert at tanning hides and smoking meat, at making candles and soap from rendered fat. More importantly, she learned to laugh again, to express opinions freely, to exist without fear. The transformation was beautiful to witness, and Quinlan fell more deeply in love with her every day. Spring came late to the high country, but when it finally arrived, it brought an explosion of life and color. The valley meadows carpeted themselves in wildflowers, and the lake thawed to reflect blue sky. Quinlan and Olivia emerged from their winter cocoon like butterflies, ready to embrace the warmer weather and longer days. It was on a perfect May morning that Olivia confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was pregnant. She told Quinlan while they were fishing at the lake, the words tumbling out with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "I am carrying our child. I am almost certain, based on my symptoms and the timing. Are you happy? I know we did not specifically plan this, but I hope you are pleased." Quinlan's response was to drop his fishing pole, pull her into his arms, and spin her around with a whoop of pure joy that echoed off the granite peaks. "Happy? Olivia, I am beyond happy. I'm ecstatic, terrified because I have no idea how to be a father, but absolutely ecstatic." They spent that day making plans and dreaming about the future. They would need to expand the cabin again, create a nursery space. Quinlan would hunt more aggressively to build up their stores of meat and hides to trade. Perhaps they could even venture down to a distant trading post to acquire supplies specifically for the baby. "I will need to learn to make proper diapers and baby clothes," Olivia said, her mind already working through the practicalities. "And we should gather more medicinal herbs in case of fever or colic. Oh, there's so much to do." "We have time," Quinlan assured her, pulling her close. "Months and months to prepare, and we will do it together, just like we do everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Olivia remained healthy and active throughout. Quinlan was alternately protective and amazed, watching the physical changes with awe and wonder. He built a beautiful cradle from carefully chosen pine, carved with designs of mountain flowers and birds. Olivia sewed tiny garments and blankets, her hands creating each stitch with love. They did make one journey to a distant trading post in the late summer, a 2-week round trip that allowed them to acquire essential supplies like soft cotton fabric, medical supplies, and a few luxuries like real coffee and sugar. The trader, an old friend of Quinlan's named Marcus, asked no questions about Olivia's past, simply accepting her as Quinlan's wife and offering his congratulations on the coming child. "You picked a good spot to raise a family," Marcus said, examining the furs Quinlan had brought to trade. "Remote enough to be left alone, but not so isolated that you cannot reach help if needed. And your woman has grit. I can see it in her eyes. She will do well up here." "She already does," Quinlan said proudly, watching Olivia examine the trader's stock of fabrics. "She has adapted to mountain life better than I ever dreamed possible." On the journey back to their valley, Olivia and Quinlan talked about their future, about the life they were building and the child who would soon join them. They discussed the question of Vernon, whether he was still searching or had given up. Neither believed he had truly stopped looking, but the trail was over a year cold now, and they had left no traces for him to follow. "Even if he somehow found this valley," Quinlan said, "he would have to come through me to get to you. And I promise you, Olivia, that will never happen. You and our child are safe here. That is a vow I will keep with my life if necessary." Olivia leaned against his shoulder as they rode, her hand resting on her swelling belly. "I believe you, and I am not afraid anymore. Whatever comes, we will face it together." The baby arrived on a crisp October morning after a labor that was difficult but not dangerous. Quinlan assisted the birth, drawing on half-remembered advice from his trapping partners who had experience with such things, and his hands trembled as he caught his son and heard the first lusty cry. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Olivia, we have a son." They named him Thomas after Olivia's father, and he was perfect. Tiny and red-faced, with dark hair and lungs that could rattle the cabin rafters when he wanted to be fed. Quinlan held his son with infinite care, a amazed that he had helped create this small miracle, and swore silent oaths to be the father he had never had. The first winter with Thomas was challenging, marked by sleepless nights and constant worry, but also filled with moments of transcendent joy. Watching Olivia nurse their son, seeing her face soft with maternal love, Quinlan felt his heart might burst with happiness. He took his turn walking the floor with a colicky baby, learned to change diapers and swaddle blankets, and discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the valley became his playground. He took his first steps chasing after a butterfly in the meadow, spoke his first words while watching his father split firewood, and developed a fearless curiosity that kept both his parents constantly alert. "He's going to be a handful," Olivia said fondly, watching their 2-year-old son attempt to climb a tree far too tall for his abilities. "He comes by it honestly," Quinlan replied with a grin. His mother did relocate to the wilderness with a strange mountain man after knowing him less than a week. Risk-taking seems to be a family trait. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Quinlan continued his work as a trapper, bringing in enough income from furs to keep them supplied with necessities from the trading post. Olivia managed their household with impressive efficiency while raising Thomas and contributing to their survival through her garden, food preservation, and countless other tasks. They were partners in the truest sense, each contributing according to their strengths, each supporting the other's weaknesses. When Thomas was 3, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Margaret. Where Thomas was boisterous and adventurous, Margaret was contemplative and gentle, happy to sit with her mother learning to sew or watching her father carve wood. The two children adored each other, and watching them play together filled Quinlan and Olivia with contentment. Years passed peacefully. The children grew strong and healthy, educated by their parents in reading, mathematics, and natural sciences. They learned the skills necessary for mountain living, becoming competent at tasks that would have seemed impossible for children their age in civilization. Thomas could track a deer through dense forest by the time he was 8, and Margaret could identify dozens of medicinal plants and knew their uses by age 7. Quinlan sometimes wondered what had become of Vernon Crawford. Had he continued searching, or had he given up and moved on? Had he told people his wife was dead, creating a false story to explain her disappearance? They had no way of knowing, and as the years accumulated, it seemed less and less important. Olivia had built a new life so completely that her old existence felt like something that had happened to a different person. Then, in the summer when Thomas was 12 and Margaret was 9, their peaceful isolation was interrupted. Quinlan had gone to the trading post for supplies, a trip he made twice a year. He was examining new rifles when Marcus pulled him aside with a troubled expression. "I thought you should know," the trader said quietly. "There was a man through here about a month ago, asking questions about a woman matching your wife's description. Said his name was Crawford, that his wife had been kidnapped years ago by a mountain man, and he had never stopped searching for her." Quinlan felt ice flood his veins. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I know nothing, see nothing, remember nothing. That is how I stay in business in these parts," Marcus replied firmly. "But I wanted to warn you, he is still looking, and he is methodical about it. Visits every settlement, every trading post, asks the same questions. Eventually, someone might remember seeing you and Olivia together. You should be prepared for that possibility." Quinlan returned to the valley with a heavy heart and shared the news with Olivia. She went pale but remained calm, her hand instinctively reaching for his. "What should we do?" she asked. "Nothing changes immediately," Quinlan said. "Vernon does not know where we are, and even if someone remembered seeing us, we left no trail to follow to this valley. But we need to be vigilant. I will set up better warning systems on the approaches, make sure we have advance notice if anyone is coming." Over the next weeks, Quinlan created a series of subtle alarms along the 3 possible approaches to their valley. Carefully arranged stones that would be disturbed by passage, stretched cords with bells hidden in the trees, signs that would alert him to any visitors long before they reached the cabin. He also had a difficult conversation with Thomas and Margaret, explaining in age-appropriate terms that their mother had once been married to a bad man, and that man might still be looking for her. He taught them what to do if strangers ever appeared. Hide in the pre-designated safe spots, stay silent, wait for the all-clear signal. The children took this seriously, but without undue fear. They had been raised to handle challenges, and this was simply one more problem to address with planning and preparation. Summer turned to fall without incident. Winter arrived with its customary blanket of snow, and they settled into the cabin for the long, dark months. But Quinlan found himself listening more carefully to the night sounds, waking at small noises that would previously not have disturbed him. Spring came, and with it, the trip bells rang. Quinlan heard them at dawn, the distant tinkling that meant someone was approaching from the southern pass. He woke Olivia with a touch, and they moved with practiced efficiency. The children were bundled into the hidden root cellar with supplies and strict instructions to stay silent. Olivia armed herself with a loaded rifle and positioned herself in the loft where she had a clear view of the cabin's entrance. Quinlan stepped outside to wait, his own rifle cradled in his arms, his expression hard and unwelcoming. Two men emerged from the tree line, Vernon Crawford and a hired gun from the look of him, both mounted and armed. Vernon looked older than Quinlan had imagined, perhaps 50 now, his face weathered and angry. When he saw Quinlan, his eyes narrowed with recognition. "You are the mountain man from Mojave," Vernon said. "The one who helped my wife after the horse incident. I remember you." "You have a good memory for something that happened 13 years ago," Quinlan replied evenly. "State your business and move on. This is private property." "I am looking for my wife, Olivia Crawford. I have reason to believe she is here, with you." Vernon's voice was cold and precise. "She was kidnapped from Mojave in 1876, and I have been searching for her ever since." "No one here by that name," Quinlan said, "and no kidnapping occurred. You are mistaken." "I do not think I am." Vernon dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. "I spoke with a trader who remembered seeing a woman matching her description with a mountain man matching yours. He recalled you purchasing supplies suitable for a woman, including fabric and personal items. That was unusual enough to stick in his memory." "Many mountain men take wives from among the native people or from settlements," Quinlan said. "That proves nothing." "Then you will not mind if I search your cabin," Vernon said, moving forward. Quinlan raised his rifle in one smooth motion, the barrel pointed steadily at Vernon's chest. "I mind very much. This is my home and you are trespassing. I have asked you to leave. Do so now, before this becomes a situation neither of us wants." The hired gun had his hand on his weapon, but Quinlan's stance made it clear he would get a shot off before either visitor could draw. The standoff stretched tight and dangerous. Then Olivia's voice rang out from the loft window, clear and strong. "Vernon, go home. I am not your wife anymore, and I will never be again. You have no claim on me, no right to pursue me. I left of my own free will, and I am staying of my own free will. It is time to let go." Vernon's face twisted with rage. "You are my wife, legal and binding in the eyes of God and the law. You belong to me, and I have every right to reclaim what is mine." "I am not property to be reclaimed," Olivia replied, and now she appeared in the doorway, her rifle trained on Vernon's companion. "I am a person with agency and choice, and I choose to be here, with this man, in this life. You cannot force me back, Vernon. The only thing you can do is leave peacefully or die here. Those are your options." Vernon looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and something shifted in his expression. She was not the broken, frightened woman he remembered. She stood tall and confident, her face strong and determined, clearly healthy and well cared for. She had transformed completely, had become someone he did not recognize. "You love him," Vernon said, and there was something like wonder in his voice, as if the concept was foreign to him. "Yes," Olivia said simply. "I love him, and he loves me, and we have built a good life here, a life built on respect and partnership, not fear and control. You could never give me what he has given me, Vernon, because you do not understand what love actually means." Something in Vernon seemed to deflate. He looked old suddenly, and tired, and perhaps for the first time he saw the truth, that Olivia had never belonged to him, not really, and that all his years of searching had been in pursuit of an illusion. "The law would side with me," he said, but there was no force behind the words. "You are legally my wife." "Then tell the law," Olivia replied. "Bring sheriffs and marshals into these mountains to drag me back. But know that I will fight, and Quinlan will fight, and it will end in bloodshed and death. And for what? To reclaim a woman who despises you? To force back into bondage someone who would rather die than return? Is that really what you want your legacy to be? Vernon stood silent for a long moment, decades of anger and obsession warring with the reality before him. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. "I could never make you happy," he said quietly. "I see that now. I thought control was the same as love, thought possession equaled partnership. I was wrong." He turned to his hired companion. "We are leaving." "But sir," the man protested, "we have not recovered your property." "She is not property," Vernon said, and there was finality in his tone. "She is a person who made a choice, and I am making the choice to respect that, finally, after all these years." He mounted his horse and looked back at Olivia one last time. "I will file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. It may take time, but I will make sure you are legally free. It is the least I can do, and perhaps the only decent thing I have ever done for you." Then he rode away, and the hired gun followed reluctantly, and Quinlan and Olivia stood together watching them disappear into the trees. When they were gone, truly gone, Olivia's legs gave out and Quinlan caught her, holding her as she shook with reaction. The children emerged from hiding and wrapped themselves around their parents, and they stood as a family, processing what had just occurred. "Is it really over?" Olivia whispered. "Can it actually be that simple?" "I do not know if he will keep his word about the divorce," Quinlan said honestly, "but I believe he is done searching, done pursuing. He saw what we have here, saw that you are truly happy, and I think that finally broke through his obsession." Over the following months, they remained cautious, but there were no further intrusions, and eventually, through Marcus the trader, word reached them that Vernon Crawford had indeed filed for divorce and that the marriage had been legally dissolved. Olivia was free, completely and officially free. That winter, Quinlan and Olivia were married again, this time with proper legal documentation, creating a record of their union that would protect their children and legitimize their family. Marcus stood as witness, along with two of Quinlan's trapping friends, and they celebrated with a feast and genuine joy. The years continued to pass peacefully after that. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who eventually established his own trap lines and built a cabin on the far side of the valley. Margaret became interested in healing and medicine, studying every book on the subject that Quinlan could acquire for her, and developed a reputation among the scattered mountain communities as someone with real skill. Quinlan and Olivia aged together, their love deepening and maturing into something solid and enduring. They had survived trauma and danger, had chosen each other repeatedly through countless small moments and a few large crises, and had built a life that satisfied them both completely. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on the porch Quinlan had built overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. Olivia's hair had gone gray, and Quinlan's shoulders had thickened with age, but the essential connection between them remained as strong as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinlan asked one such evening. "The isolation, the hardship, the things you gave up for this life?" Olivia took his weathered hand in hers, tracing the familiar calluses and scars. "Not for a single moment. You gave me back my life, Quinlan. You showed me what love actually means, what partnership truly is. Every challenge we have faced has been worth it for the privilege of facing it together." "I love you," Quinlan said simply, as he had said thousands of times over the decades, and as he would continue saying for all the years remaining to them. "I love you too," Olivia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "My mountain man, my savior, my partner, my home." They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, bright and infinite in the clear mountain air, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had chosen to build something beautiful from their shared pain. Their children were thriving, their grandchildren would soon arrive, and their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. The bruises were long healed, the fear long vanquished, and in their place was something rare and precious, genuine happiness, hard-won and deeply cherished, in a valley where mountains touched the sky and love had conquered all.